Hey, welcome to Leader Feeder, the show where we share practical tips for you and your team. My name is Kirk, and I'm your host. So how can you build accountability without killing morale? That's what we're going to talk about today. Accountability is one of those tricky words that seems to have a really negative connotation. When we think of accountability, we think of being held responsible for something, and usually it comes with that idea of being held responsible when we make a mistake or do something wrong. We don't tend to think of accountability as really just being responsible for the outcomes of our decisions and how we solve problems, regardless of whether those are good or bad. But really, that's what accountability is. It's being held to our outcomes that we're responsible for, both good and bad. And I think because it tends to skew in the negative, that's why we tend to be a little bit afraid of this idea of accountability. And so what we tend to see with our clients is a couple of things. The first thing is that we haven't really come across an organization where accountability hasn't been something they want to see more of, where they want to improve. Instead, we hear a lot of, we don't think there's much accountability. Those conversations aren't really happening. People aren't being held accountable. So almost every organization we work with wants more accountability. The other thing we hear happening is that feedback conversations, so related to accountability, holding people accountable, aren't really happening either. So not only is there just no real accountability, but no conversations about accountability are happening. And as you can imagine, if there's no conversations about something happening, then that thing probably isn't present, right? We have what we call the WOW, or the words on the wall, right? So that's our mission, our vision, and our values. And most big companies especially, but lots of companies do have their mission, vision, and values, and they'll post them on the wall on a certain spot in the break room or in the lobby, right? But at the end of the day, that's meant to be kind of the key messaging and the key focus and the key priorities of that company. But at the end of the day, what we know is what the team takes as what really matters to the company is what we measure, it's what we talk about, it's what we celebrate, and it's what we hold people accountable to. Right? And so the question is, if there's no conversations being had about accountability, then is accountability really a priority for the organization? And the answer typically is it is a priority, but unfortunately the conversations aren't happening. So there's a disconnect there. And so what we want to help organizations do, and what we do help organizations do, is to have better accountability by having feedback conversations. Now, why do we avoid it? Well, like I said, accountability tends to be a bit of a negative word, and we think of it as sort of punishing people when something doesn't go well. When there's a failure or a shortcoming, we have to hold them accountable. We have to, show them that they made a mistake or that they let us down. But accountability, again, can be positive or negative. And so accountability conversations are not always inherently negative. In fact, a lot of times they're actually sort of celebratory because we're showing that we gave somebody authority or ownership over a project or a task, and they came through and it went well. And so the accountability on that side is saying, hey, we held you accountable, and we just want to say that you did a great job. Wonderful. Good work. On the flip side, when it doesn't go according to plan, we often think that the word that is going on in our head is negative. We have to kind of punish them in a way or chide them. Even if we don't necessarily think of it as punishing them, it's like, I got to make them see that this was a mistake. But I think if we dig down a little bit deeper, what we really want is we just don't want the mistake to happen again. I don't want the person to feel stupid or guilty or shamed because they made a mistake. Not really, because those things don't generally make people want to do better in most cases. At least not for the right reasons. Instead, what we want is we just want the mistake to go away. So typically what we want is understanding. We want the person to understand what they did and why what they did wasn't either appropriate or sufficient, or why it just didn't allow us to get the job done, why it led to the outcome that it did. So it becomes a learning conversation, a constructive conversation where we're learning, developing, and growing, rather than a negative conversation where we're just trying to sort of punish them for something that didn't go well. And I think when we reframe it that way, it allows us to be a little bit less concerned or worried about going into those conversations as a frontline leader, because it can be nerve-wracking to go in and go, I got to give this person this negative feedback, and I'm afraid how they're going to respond, and I'm afraid, are they even going to change? I have my doubts about whether they're even going to change or not, and it makes it a situation that is kind of uncomfortable and that we don't want to deal with. So then what happens? Well, if we're forced to go into the conversation, if there's really no way out of giving feedback, because remember, the first thing I mentioned is that the feedback generally isn't happening. We hope problems will just go away on their own. We hope people will just have the self-awareness to figure it out for themselves and kind of see there was a mistake and fix it. So when the conversations aren't happening most of the time, but when they are happening, because we go into it a bit nervous, a bit perhaps upset, a bit annoyed that we're having to have the conversation, then we tend to not lead with kind of calm and that sort of constructive mindset that we should be. And what happens is we often come off harsher or more negative than we want to. And part of it's, I think, our history of a more autocratic leadership style. Part of it might be what we receive from our own leaders. And another part is, again, the anxiety that comes along with having to have a difficult conversation. So you kind of come down hard on them to make sure it doesn't happen again, rather than just sitting down and going, hey, what the heck happened? How can we fix this? You know, we don't want this to happen again. What are the lessons learned here to avoid it from happening again? So a couple of suggestions I want to provide. That's a really big opening kind of framework there, but a couple of suggestions I want to provide to you in order to help have more accountability conversations that don't kill the morale, that don't make a person that feels defeated, deflated, like a failure, like they're being punished. All right. First thing, address issues early and constructively. It's a lot easier, or generally speaking, a lot easier to deal with an issue while it's small. So if you notice someone doing something on the line that isn't quite the way you'd like to see it done, or isn't following the proper protocol or SOP, address it early. Do not assume that they'll notice it for themselves. Do not assume that they'll magically correct their behavior. Go to them and make that small correction while it is still a small correction and where the failure component is very, very tiny, rather than waiting until it's a really big problem, because that also gets us more on edge as leaders to then have to go address it now that we've had a bigger failure. So address it early and address it often. Now, linked to that, when you do these conversations more regularly, it's like anything that you practice. You typically get better the more you do it. And so taking something that is kind of nerve-wracking and we wait until it becomes a big problem before we address it, makes it a bigger thing, and it makes it, the stakes are higher. If we talk about it when it's small and we do it often, we actually get a lot better at giving feedback in a constructive way before there's a lot of higher risk pieces or components at stake. So doing it often is going to make us better at it, and making us better at it is going to make us feel less nervous about it. Now here's on the flip side, not only does it make us better at it, it makes our team better at receiving it. If you're a leader that only gives feedback and only holds people accountable when the stakes are quite high and when there's been a big failure because you've been putting off those conversations and when the situation was smaller, then it makes people very uncomfortable with those conversations, the people on your team, because they're going, oh, Ted wants to talk to me. I must have really messed up, because otherwise, he would just be letting me do my thing. So this must be really bad. This must be really big. But if it's a team where they're constantly getting a lot of feedback, constructive feedback, then getting little bits of feedback here and there becomes really something they become quite used to. So I would recommend giving more feedback more often. It's going to make you more comfortable with it. It's going to make them more comfortable with it. And it's not a big shock when they're getting corrected on things, because there's always little things that our team could be doing differently or better. All right. And so that's my really top suggestion for helping give feedback that doesn't break the morale, because the morale is built on the pride in the work we do, the sense of collaboration on the team, and a number of other factors. And you can continue to build that when you're constructively building people up, saying, hey, I'm not here to kind of slap your wrist. I'm not here to punish you. I just want to help you do something in a better way than the last time you did it. And that, again, the more you're doing that, the more that comes off as, yeah, they're trying to support our development. They're not just kind of waiting for things to go really wrong and then trying to blame me, and that's them holding me accountable. So that's how you turn accountability into more of a positive ongoing thing without killing morale, is that it's really just simple feedback conversations that are had more frequently, and it makes the team more comfortable with getting that feedback regularly. You can also find lots of other content about how to have good feedback conversations, how to hold your team accountable in a positive way on all of our social media. So feel free to check those out if you're interested. And if you're thinking that, this is just the tip of the iceberg and you really want to dive into some more leadership development relative to giving feedback, relative to empowerment, accountability, or any other topics, we would love to hear from you and find out how we can help your organization to succeed. You just got to visit us at uniquedevelopment.com.